Knockout artist Francis Ngannou has been one of the more outspoken fighters on the roster when it comes to fighter pay, the lack of health insurance for fighters, and their inability to bring in personal sponsors or fight outside the promotion. Of course, this is no small part because of his championship status and his star power. With a few months left on his contract, Francis has little to lose by speaking his mind, and we're here to tell you all about it. First off, the champ's shaky future with the company. Francis hadn't been in action for the better part of a year now, taking leaves for ACL and MCL surgeries on his right knee following a victory over Cyril Gane. He recently informed fans about delaying his return from December to January of next year, but after, Ngannou's a free agent. Usually, champions would renegotiate a sweeter deal with any promotion, but Francis feels the pot just can't be sweetened enough for him to stay within current company policies. Moreover, he's been very clear about his ambition to cross over into boxing, along with several rumors of a super fight against WBC king Tyson Fury. While we would love to see that happen, Ngannou isn't coming to the ring to fight Fury. He's coming to box. A fight of that power would make everyone a lot of money, but Francis would still box if he wasn't fighting Fury. He seems more interested in the competitive aspect of shifting from MMA after reaching the pinnacle of the heavyweight division. Frankly, all he has left to do is fight with Jon Jones, and it's impossible to predict when we're gonna see Jon again. Other than that, his contract with the UFC is becoming something that doesn't make as much money as he could make, while also restricted in the pursuit of his other professional goals. Moving on, the policy that cost Francis the most. That policy could be the promotion system, advertisement, and sponsorship, and the cost would be over $1 million. Before the 2015 deal with Reebok, fighters could advertise their personal sponsors on their apparel. The deal banned this for sleeker-looking outfits that don't make the fighters much money at all. Francis recently reported a potential sponsorship deal with a cryptocurrency exchange company that he lost because of the UFC. The deal with Crypto.com, one that disproportionately benefits the management, presented a conflict of interest with Francis' sponsor. Even if it hadn't, the champion wouldn't be able to sport any of their logos on fight night. This has been a big issue for fighters with not as much star power as the division's top 5. They used to rely heavily on sponsorships to supplement their income, especially since they wouldn't have PPV shares like event headliners. Next, what do fighters make with their current deals? The new deal with Venom in 2021 made it compulsory for all fighters to wear Venom apparel during their fights, and while the uniforms look amazing, the deal isn't so good. It depends on the number of fights the athlete has in the promotion, as opposed to his popularity and the eyes he's bringing to the table. Even the highest bracket of payment per fight, that is $42,000 per fight for UFC champions on fighters challenging for a title, is extremely far from what fighters made when they had more control over their sponsors. New fighters get a mere $4,000 per fight, with slight increments with experience until the highest of $21,000 for the most experienced fighters. Under this model, a fighter with star power outside the UFC and good sponsorships would have taken a loss in revenue to fight in the most competitive organization. In this case, fighters do turn towards endorsements. They promote products on their personal online platforms, letting them utilize their fan base without outside interference. Coming up, the UFC fighter pay structure. Fighter pay is one of the most talked about problems in the UFC, so we think Francis's comments are a good opportunity to actually understand how and how much the fighters are paid. The exact numbers for each fight are unknown and difficult to estimate because each fighter gets paid slightly differently, depending upon their recent performances and popularity. However, the athletes are divided into 3 broad tiers of pay. While champions and the most famous stars can net between $500,000 to $3 million, someone just starting out may go home with $15,000 even if they win their fight. The newest members of the roster get paid between $10,000 and $30,000 per fight, with more established stars being paid up to $250,000, depending on the matchup and their star power. Additionally, fighters get a small amount from the sponsorship deal with Venom and have the possibility to take home one of the $50,000 bonuses Dana gives out for performances. All told, the average pay for a UFC fighter in 2021 was a little over $160,000 $100,000 in 2021. While this may seem like a pretty decent amount and is up from the previous year's $145,000, it's not exactly representative. Next up, why should fighters make more than they do? For a minute, let's forget that these human beings put their bodies through intense physical training all year round, only to be locked in a cage with a man intent on causing them pain. And let's pretend a hospital stay after a night at the office is normal. Even then, fighters are barely making enough to survive at times. The round figure of $160,000 doesn't show the costs of being a UFC fighter. They have to pay the salaries of nutritionists, trainers, and coaches all year round, and pay gym membership fees. Their title of independent contractor doesn't grant them employee health care, and they have to pay for their own hospital visits. What's more, their lifestyle rarely ever allows them to hold a consistent job alongside the UFC. Very few fighters come from privileged households. They began fighting in cages to make money to survive, and are now subject to an industry monopolized by a single organization whose policies limit MMA fighters to live up to their true financial potential. There isn't even an official representative of the fighters in the meetings that make important decisions. Finally, could Francis make a difference? The heavyweight champ is in a unique position with the company. He's a huge international star, champion of the heaviest division, and in the prime of his career. He's too valuable to just let go for the UFC, but his problems with the company are systemic. While Francis may not be able to single-handedly implement changes into the UFC's structure, if he can convince Dana to let him box alongside his UFC contract, or manages to negotiate a boxing match with Fury in the UFC, he would have set a precedent in the company, giving the fighter some autonomy in the decision-making. With Nate Diaz recently retiring and going off to box for a while, if Ngannou follows suit, then the UFC could have a serious problem with fighters frustrated with low pay and low control over their careers. They could either follow suit and begin moving over into boxing after gaining fame in the UFC, or opt for one of the several growing MMA promotions across the world. In other news, starting with, 3 fighters were dropped from the next UFC event. The upcoming PPV event, UFC 280, headlining Islam v Makhachev, just lost 3 fighters from its list of prelims. Slim Trabelsi is the first, might have set the record for the shortest UFC career ever. The fighter was hired and let go within the span of a day to potentially replace Abdelwahab. Trabelsi's contract complications left Abdelwahab's previous opponent, Parker Porter, once again alone, and his fight eventually had to be cancelled when no replacement fighter could be found. Lastly, Jamie Malarkey had to pull out of his fight with Mustafayev due to an injury sustained during training. Next up, Usman opens up about Zhang Weili. Former welterweight champion Kamaru Usman recently spoke about his teammate Thug Rose and her loss of the belt this year to Esparza. He believed Rose would be back once again, but in the meantime, Zhang has secured another title shot against Esparza after knocking out Yon in her most recent outing. For Kamaru, Weili winning the fight and claiming to be champion would just feel disingenuous when Rose has beaten her twice within the octagon, although the second fight was a war of attrition, and the first had an awesome head kick, so we don't mind the third one for the belt. Finally, Diaz is rumored to be in negotiations with Bellator. Ever since his contract ended, Nate Diaz has become one of the hottest properties in MMA free agency, and that brings options. One of those is to return to MMA, but this time under the banner of rival MMA promotion Bellator. Bellator president Scott Coker confirmed that they had reached out to Nate and would love to have him on board. Could make sense too, considering Nate's preferred opponent Jake Paul is scheduled to fight Anderson Silva next, giving Diaz some free time. Or he could just decide to pursue boxing and use his time to train. Francis is right. Not a lot of people have control over their trajectory in the UFC, but his contributions towards normalizing the discussion has led to more athletes making the switch. As for Ngannou, we've yet to see what he does when he has control. Where do you think Diaz and Francis will end up? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe.